Millionaire heard his maid's son crying over a broken toy. His action shocked the household. The sound of heartbroken sobs echoed through the mansion's marble hallways, stopping Richard Blackwood dead in his tracks. The self-made tech millionaire had heard many sounds in his empty palace, but never the cry of a child. What he discovered in the East Wing would change his life forever, and reveal a secret that had been buried for 30 years. Maria Gonzalez had worked as Richard's housekeeper for 5 years, always professional, always on time. But today was different. Today, her babysitter had cancelled last minute, forcing her to bring her 6-year-old son, Diego, to work. She'd set him up in a small utility room with his favorite toy, a worn action figure that had seen better days. "It's broken, Mama," Diego whimpered, holding up the superhero with its arm dangling by a thread. "I can't fix him." Maria knelt beside her son, her uniform already wrinkled from a morning of cleaning. "I know, Mijo. We'll try to get another one soon." But they both knew that wasn't true. There would be no money for toys this month, not with the medical bills piling up. What neither of them realized was that Richard stood in the doorway, watching. The cold, calculating businessman who'd built an empire from nothing felt something crack inside his chest, something he thought had died years ago when his wife left him, taking their unborn child with her. "May I?" Richard asked, stepping into the room and extending his hand toward the broken toy. Maria jumped to her feet, her face pale. "Mr. Blackwood. I'm so sorry, I had no choice but to." Richard raised his hand, silencing her apology. "The toy. May I see it?" Diego reluctantly handed over his prized possession, tears still streaming down his face. Richard turned the action figure over in his hands, studying it with the same intensity he used when examining million-dollar contracts. "This is a Cosmic Defender, isn't it? Original series?" Diego nodded, surprised that this tall man in expensive clothes knew about his superhero. "I had the same one when I was your age," Richard said softly. Then, without another word, he walked out of the room, still holding the broken toy. Maria's heart sank. Was this the end of her job? Would she be fired for bringing her son to work? 3 hours later, Richard's sleek black Bentley pulled into the driveway. He entered the house carrying a large shopping bag, his face unreadable as he summoned Maria to the living room. What happened next left the entire household staff speechless. Richard hadn't just replaced the toy, he'd bought the entire Cosmic Defenders collection. But that wasn't what shocked everyone. It was what he said next that changed everything. "Diego," Richard said, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes, "would you like to come work with me in my office tomorrow? I could use an assistant who knows his superheroes." Maria began to protest, but Richard continued, his voice catching slightly. "Your mother tells me you're good with computers. I was too, at your age." As Diego excitedly explored his new toys, Richard pulled Maria aside, his normally stern face softened with emotion. 30 years ago, I was that boy," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mother cleaned houses to support us after my father left. One day, a man saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never got to thank him before he passed away. Maybe this is my chance to pay it forward." What began as a simple act of kindness evolved into something neither Maria nor Richard expected. Over the following weeks, Richard began mentoring Diego, teaching him coding basics after school. The boy's natural talent reminded Richard of his younger self, hungry for knowledge, eager to learn. But Richard's business rival, Victor Chambers, saw this new relationship as a weakness to exploit. "Getting soft in your old age, Blackwood," he taunted at a charity gala. "Playing daddy to your maid's kid won't help your company's falling stock prices." Richard felt his old defenses rising, the walls he'd built around his heart threatening to close again. Was he being foolish? Was this all just some misguided attempt to fill the void in his life? That night, as Richard drove home alone, he nearly convinced himself to end the mentorship. It would be easier that way, safer for everyone involved. But when he arrived at his mansion, he found a handmade card slipped under his door. In crayon, Diego had drawn Richard standing beside him, both wearing superhero capes. Inside, in a child's uneven handwriting, "Thank you for fixing more than just my toy." Richard sank into his leather chair, the card trembling in his hands. For the first time in decades, the millionaire who had everything allowed himself to cry. The transformation in Richard became the talk of the business world. The man once known as the Shark began a foundation for underprivileged children interested in technology. His company's new family-friendly policies made headlines, and surprisingly, profits soared. 6 months later, at the company's annual picnic, an event Richard had previously always skipped, he stood on stage with Diego beside him. "This young man," Richard announced to the crowd of employees and their families, "reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Success isn't measured by what we have, but by what we give." As applause erupted, Maria watched from the sidelines, her heart full. The man who had once barely acknowledged her existence now considered her family part of his own. That night, as Richard walked Maria to her car, their hands brushed accidentally. The electricity between them was undeniable, but neither was ready to acknowledge it, not yet. Some stories take time to unfold, and theirs was just beginning. "Thank you," Maria said simply, her eyes conveying what words couldn't. Richard smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "No, thank you. For bringing your son to work that day." The seasons changed, and with them, so did the dynamics in the Blackwood mansion. Fall brought crisp air and new beginnings as Diego started a new school year, one where Richard had quietly arranged a scholarship to the city's most prestigious STEM academy. Winter blanketed the estate in snow, and for the first time in 15 years, Richard decorated for Christmas, helping Diego hang lights while Maria baked her grandmother's cinnamon cookies in the kitchen. But not everyone celebrated this newfound happiness. Victor Chambers had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His company, Chamber Tech, had been losing contracts to Blackwood Industries ever since Richard's public image transformation. The ruthless competitor couldn't understand how becoming soft had somehow strengthened Richard's business position. "He's got to have an angle," Victor muttered to his assistant as they reviewed Blackwood's rising stock prices. "Nobody changes that much without a reason." The opportunity Victor had been waiting for came in early spring. A major government contract was up for grabs, one that would cement the winning company's dominance in the tech sector for years to come. Both Blackwood Industries and Chamber Tech were finalists, with presentations scheduled for the same day. The night before the presentation, Richard worked late at the office, perfecting his proposal. Maria had brought dinner for him, and Diego had tagged along, excited to see the big boss office, where Richard worked. "You're gonna crush it tomorrow, Mr. B," Diego exclaimed, using the nickname he'd given Richard months ago. At 7 years old now, the boy's vocabulary had expanded to include all the business slang he'd picked up from hanging around Richard's employees. Richard laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, buddy." What none of them noticed was the maintenance worker who wasn't really a maintenance worker, slipping a small device under Richard's desk, a device programmed to corrupt all data on Blackwood servers at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, just as Richard's presentation was scheduled to begin. The morning of the presentation dawned bright and clear. Richard kissed Maria on the cheek, something that had become a comfortable habit in recent weeks, and headed to the office earlier than usual, confidence in his stride. "Knock 'em dead, boss," Maria said with a smile that warmed him more than the morning coffee in his hand. But when Richard arrived at his office, chaos greeted him. His assistant met him at the elevator, panic etched across her face. "Sir, the servers, they're down. Everything's gone. The presentation, the prototypes, all of it." Richard's blood ran cold. In all his years in business, he'd never experienced a catastrophe of this magnitude. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "Chambers," he whispered, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. With less than an hour before the presentation and no materials to present, Richard did something he hadn't done in years. He called for help. Not from his tech team or his lawyers, but from Maria. "I need Diego," he said simply when she answered. "And I need you to trust me." 45 minutes later, Richard walked into the presentation room where government officials and industry leaders sat waiting. Victor Chambers sat in the front row, a barely concealed smirk on his face. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I had planned to show you sophisticated slides and demonstrations today. But sometimes, life has other plans." He gestured to the door, where Maria entered with Diego. The boy carried his tablet, the one Richard had given him for Christmas. "Instead, I'd like to introduce you to the future of Blackwood Industries. Diego, would you show them what we've been working on?" Diego, nervous but excited, connected his tablet to the presentation screen. What appeared wasn't a polished corporate presentation, but something far more powerful, a simple coding project that Diego had been developing under Richard's guidance. A program designed to help children with learning disabilities access technology more easily. "This is what Blackwood stands for now," Richard explained as Diego demonstrated the program's features. "Not just cutting-edge technology, but technology with heart. Technology that serves humanity, not the other way around." The room fell silent as the demonstration concluded. Then, slowly, one of the government officials began to applaud. Others joined in until the room filled with thunderous approval. Victor Chambers stormed out before his own presentation slot, knowing he'd been defeated not by Richard's wealth or business acumen, but by something he could never compete with: authenticity. That evening, as news broke that Blackwood Industries had secured the contract, Richard found Maria in the garden of his estate, sitting alone on a bench beneath flowering cherry trees. "We did it," he said, sitting beside her. "Or rather, Diego did it." Maria turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You could have lost everything today." Richard took her hand, no longer pretending the touch was accidental. "I realized something today, Maria. I spent years building walls to protect what I thought mattered: money, power, status. But the only things truly worth protecting walked into my life by accident." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside wasn't a ring, it was too soon for that, but a key. "This house has never been a home," he said softly. "Not until you and Diego filled it with laughter. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to see where this journey takes us. Together." Maria closed her fingers around the key, her heart racing. "My abuela always said God works in mysterious ways," she whispered. "I never thought a broken toy would fix so many broken hearts." As the cherry blossoms drifted down around them, Richard leaned forward and kissed her, gently, tenderly, a promise of tomorrows yet to come. Sometimes the smallest moments change everything. A broken toy. A child's tears. A heart that remembers how to feel. If you were moved by this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. From which country are you watching? Let us know in the comments below.